We're going to start today's session with a conversation with Felix Hartmann, Managing Partner at Hartmann Capital. Felix, welcome back to the show. Could you unmute?
Thank you so much for having me. So glad to be here this morning.
So Felix, let's start with a little bit of an introduction about Hartmann Capital and yourself, and then we will dive into investment thesis mostly.
Wonderful. So for mini background, I started my firm back in 2018. Back then we started with an initial fund, which was actually in the hedge fund space. So I launched one of the first crypto asset hedge funds. Started very humbly, very small, $217,000, one-man show, and then grew it over the next 6 years to about 50 million in assets. And, it was through the digital asset world that there was this thesis of the metaverse that became very popular in 2020, 2021. Nowadays, it's a very hated term. But the idea of the metaverse, rang very true to me outside of what Web3 represented. So you have platforms like Roblox, you have platforms like Fortnite, Minecraft, that have hundreds of millions of users a day. And at the same time, you had virtual reality start taking off as a new format where Facebook rebranded to Meta and essentially bet the entire ship on it. Yep. And so that's when we got into venture capital and launched our first venture fund that focused on that particular vertical. And the deeper we dug into, the more we realized also that, AI was going to do a lot of the heavy lifting in bringing those worlds to life. Whether that is through AI-powered NPCs, whether that's also through helping turn individual creators into powerhouses that can have the same kind of output that a major AAA studio could have, right? As we're seeing more and more tools come out that enable that. I guess now I'm jumping ahead because I was about to say, now we're on Fund 2, and with Fund 2, essentially we've got two core theses. And as it pertains to AI, it's two different fields, because we've been so deep in the spatial computing space with virtual reality that all of a sudden augmented reality, smart glasses became a little bit more center focus. And something that popped out really quickly was that there's a huge divide between virtual reality might be gaming, but smart glasses are really more about human enhancement. And so this is how we got into thesis number one, which is the intersection of essentially human AI integration. Everybody already uses ChatGPT and Grok, Anthropic, and so forth in the day-to-day on desktop and computer. But the question is, how do we bring AI with us 24/7 when we leave the house? How do we use AI to enrich our experiences when we're out on the street, in stores, and so forth? And to us, that's where new form factors come in. Whether that is smart glasses, brain-computer interfaces, or others we haven't even thought of yet, that might enable us to really integrate AI into our day-to-day life while also making us smarter, better, faster, and so forth. The second piece to the thesis is life after work, because ultimately AI is going to do more and more of our work for us. We're probably going to work, it's not that we're going to all lose our jobs, we're going to work fewer hours, probably going to have more buying power because AI is also deflationary. Interesting stat that since the 1920s, we used to work about 3,500 hours a year. It's down to 1,500 hours a year. We used to spend about 14% of our annual income on non-necessities. That's up to 50%. And so the core thesis here is, what happened life after work? Where do we find meaning, connection, challenge? And to us, that's the space of entertainment, gaming, and that's also where the blue ocean of virtual reality gaming comes in. And there too, of course, AI plays a huge role, and you've probably seen this on social media, whether that's the VO3 announcement, where a lot of people made these really incredible videos generated by nothing but a text prompt.
So you've already laid out your investment thesis. So just a couple of quick things. Well, how big is Fund 2 right now?
50 million. So we're currently in the process of raising 50 million. We've already closed on the first 10. We've already got the first 7 companies in the cohort. So the goal is to back 40 companies in the pre-seed to seed stage.
So talk about the check sizes, pre-seed to seed. What size checks are you writing?
So Fund 1 was very much a deal-by-deal decision-making process. And in hindsight, we didn't love that, because I found that a lot of times you get the most amount of data on a company not before, not as, but after you invest. And so what we've decided with Fund 2 is that we're doing standardized checks, almost the way I'm used to it from the hedge fund world, where it's the exact same risk on every investment, 300K standard check size on an entry, with then holding 1 to 2 million as a follow-up investment for the top 20% of the companies we back. So it might be that we back 40 companies with 300K each, and then 8 of those, the top 8 that after we get to know them, after we work with them, after we see how to deal with challenges, can they pivot effectively when need to, how do they communicate with investors after the courting process is over, right? All these things matter, and at that point, we'll follow on. I probably wouldn't lean as heavily on follow-on if the environment was hotter, but given that the market is still rather in a lull when it comes to the funding environment, I believe that we have the ability to essentially take our time and re-up without having to overpay for it the second time.
And what is the geographical focus of the companies that you want to invest in?
We are, thus far, so far, we're focused on the US and Europe. I'm happy to expand that as we get the right analyst talent that is local to the region. I wouldn't invest, let's say, in LATAM unless I have somebody on the ground in LATAM. I wouldn't invest in, as you mentioned, India. India is a really fast-growing space unless I had somebody boots on the ground in India that can meet those entrepreneurs and diligence them. So far, we are US-based, Europe-based, where also a lot of the growth is happening in gaming and AI.
Mm-hmm. So let's discuss some of the investments you have made that are looking really interesting and finding product market fit and repeatability and so forth, which are the cornerstone elements of a venture scale company.
Gotcha. Okay, so if we're looking at companies that are more down the road, that have had major product market fit, a couple come to mind. One is DressX. So DressX is the #1 digital fashion marketplace brand technology company in the world right now. They fit into squarely with this life after work thesis, the metaverse, so to say, where kids right now are spending billions of dollars a year on in-game wearables, meaning they care. While we used to care what we wear to school, whether it's the shoes, the backpack, and so forth, kids nowadays spend a lot of time on what do they wear when they go to virtual spaces like Roblox, Fortnite, and so forth. DressX essentially is the leader in that. So they are on Roblox, they're on Snapchat, on Meta, on all the platforms. They're the main vendor essentially. Mm-hmm. And they have a gap between traditional brands, whether that is a Hugo Boss, an Adidas, a Prada, Dior, all the famous brands have worked with them to bring their traditional fashion to its digital space. Mm-hmm. Now, what's interesting is, so one, they fit scale. If you go to any of those platforms, you can find them. They also, in terms of volume, they do more than anybody else. So they are, in the process of raising a Series B, or they're going to be raising a Series B later this year. So they've made quite a lot of revenue. But beyond that, they're also, again, tapping into AI, where something that's really important is, it's not just about making an AI wrapper, but rather you need to own the distribution. And so DressX already owns the distribution, whether that is with fashion designers, whether that is with consumers. And so now they were able to also create, whether that's AI dressing tools, where you can buy a digital outfit and see how it would look on you. You could, with one click, essentially put it on, you have a photo of yourself, and you can change the outfit, post it on Instagram, right? So all of a sudden, this can also become interesting for influencers that used to do hundreds of shoots essentially all the time. Now they do one shoot and they can essentially take the brand's clothing and just overlay it on them. And then you take a step further with creativity. Now any young person, for example, without having access to production and so forth, can start inventing and designing new outfits. And then if they succeed, they might just get discovered and they might go into real fashion, or they don't need to. So that's something that's very niche. And I love that, where you're not just going after, the 20,000th Uber off, right? Or the Netflix off, or the cursor off, as it is popular today. But it's that you find something that, solves a real market demand that's present today, that's only growing, triple digits a year, which is digital consumption. And you then also go after it with, unique new technologies. So they have these AI integrations, but they also have, for example, NFTs, as unpopular as they might seem to be, right? You can have digital ownership over the items that you produce. So that's a unique example.
So Felix, I want to double click down on something in what you described, this interesting, very interesting business. So when kids go to the digital world
Yep.
and they're looking for outfits to go in, are these outfits that look like avatars, or these are human beings looking like human
Yeah.
beings with clothes that fit human beings? What
So
are we talking about?
yeah. So ironically, platforms like Roblox and Fortnite predominantly use the human form factor. So they look like humans, even maybe in like much lower graphics than Roblox in particular. What's interesting is that I thought this too, that in the virtual world people would buy all these crazy, unique fantasy outfits. That's not necessarily the case. The best selling item for DressX actually is a t-shirt with the word DressX on the front. So it's almost like the supreme of the digital world, right? Where it's a t-shirt, right? But that makes sense because even when you have, like, so for example, like we spend a lot of time in virtual reality, and Meta has their own avatars. And once I create mine, I'm like, well, I do want to look like I would look, right? Like you almost try to recreate yourself. You want to recreate your style, but in the digital world. And so every platform has free items, but of course, then maybe find something premium. And the nice thing is these are microtransactions, right? Like it might be 49 cents, it might be $1, maybe it's $2, right? But it's something very small where they don't think about it too much, or they might they might keep their wardrobe up to date because one, it doesn't take up space, and then even better for the producer, the margins are massive, right? I mean, you have to first invent it, and then you have to pay maybe a store royalty, right? Meaning Meta will get something, Roblox will get something, but everything else, essentially, especially for first-party designs, meaning they created that in-house, it's 100% take rate, right? Or after store fees, it's a 70% take rate. That's
so. But when you talk about Adidas or Nike, or I don't know if you have the fashion designers also going on there. What is their workflow, and how do they be there? Is it more an advertising opportunity and introducing people to the brands? And
no, so I mean, obviously, so once something is a third party design, right? The creator, of course, themselves also gets royalties, right? So they themselves get paid as well. So one, it is a revenue generating opportunity for them. But also, of course, yes, it can naturally be a branding opportunity where I knew some fashion designers, they, to use informal language, like they popped off, they became famous in 2021 when the NFT hype was happening, because there's a lot of eyeballs, a lot of attention towards that space. And so they leveraged creating digital fashion to stand out from the crowd, and then, got traditional contracts as well. But ultimately, I think it's a large piece of it is just brand building, right? I think the same way brands nowadays, and that's whether that is a Coca-Cola, which by the way partnered with DressX at one point, they distributed lots of bottles with a QR code where you got a digital wearable, right? All the way to personalities of the Generation Alpha, Generation Z crowd, like Mr. Beast, right? Like they are incentivized to keep their branding essentially going 24/7 with omnipresence. So like they would benefit from like releasing their own drops, their own items, and so forth in these virtual worlds. But of course, all this, that's a single portfolio company, so it's not that we focus on digital fashion, but to us, we did a lot of digging to find like who is the category champion in this, and to us that was DressX, and so we've just been building on with them since 2022 now. And for what's worth, to share some numbers, back in 2022 when we first backed them, I think they sold about 200,000 items. 2023, it was over 2.1 million items. Last year, 2024, it was over 78 million items.
Wow.
And so, there's real traction. There's, real users. And I think if anything, it is more and more a generational moment now as well. You just look at, for example, Roblox stock, right? Roblox has been growing quite a bit, where I believe one of the most recent quarterly earnings numbers, it was about 350 million users. And I don't want to be quoted wrong. So it's either daily active, monthly active. That's important differentiation, but still a lot. Either way, that's more people than live in the United States of America. So that's, just for the scope of it.
It's huge, yeah. You have a question from the audience. Funny is asking, Felix, does it allow people like me to design an apparel and publish? If someone buys it, then I get a share of the revenue. That's the model, yeah?
Yes, so you can do that. And they
So
get
I have a different question, but we're going to go on to your next case study in just a moment, just because it's so interesting what you described. You know, I've done, I did one of the first online fashion companies. It was real fashion. It was regular fashion in 1999. So the question that is swirling in my mind is, you have so many users and so much activity. It must be segmented though, right? Is it the fashionistas who are on there, or is it more the geeks on there who like t-shirts and fashion? This is not the place for fashionistas.
No, I think the high volume just comes from kids, honestly. So what I think is that it's really the broad generation Alpha, Generation Z crowd. And when I say Generation Z, I actually mean the young Generation Z, because it is 2025 now, and some Gen Zs are actually in their 20s. So they're not as young as they sound anymore. So I think that, like, a lot of the volume, for example, let's say, it comes from Snapchat, and so we might be talking about a 16, Snapchat might be more like a 16, 18, 21-year-old, like, that pays $2 to dress their avatar because they use the avatars in their emojis, right? It's like, not like when you reply to something, you put this little sticker on top that has your avatar. And so if let's say you got, like, if it's me and I see that there's a cool looking leather jacket that it costs $2. I mean, I like $2. You spent it on, like, a coffee nowadays costs, $6, $5 in Miami, LA, you name it. So I'm like, who cares? And then you double click Apple Pay, it's done, right? It's like, even I might be the target audience, right? But then, somebody younger, like on Roblox, this is anecdotal, but even one of my LPs, so we had an LP dinner. So, limited partners that invest in venture funds, and then I invest their money into startups, told us that their kids were spending $200 a weekend on Roblox. So it's a lot of money. First, you got to have that money, but also, like, there's their audiences. And they said, like, their kids would meet up with other kids, like the same way we got. They would sit in a circle on their phones and play Roblox. So, like, that is the digital square. And, so for some, it might be they spend $2. For other people, it might be $200. But look, it's very variable and elastic, right? And interesting enough, a lot of the content is free. And this is something now, just to even, like, as a very smooth transition, we've backed a lot of game studios. And what most of the game studios realized is that they are better off going free to play instead of having a premium title. So in the past, you charge $20 to get my game. Now they say anybody gets to play the game for free. We want as many eyeballs, as many users as possible. And then all the monetization happens on the back end, whether that is cosmetics, subscriptions, consumables, right? Like, always
in-app purchase.
In-app, yeah. And not even play to win, not even like, where it's like, I have to pay money so that I can feel good and win. No, it's just like, if you love the ecosystem, like, you want to be visible within it, right? Maybe you get access, like, again, your avatar looks different because you spend so much time and you care about it, right? Or you can earn extra points for progression. So things like that.
So tell me more about what you're seeing in terms of AI in your world. So whatever, even if it's earlier stage investments, what kind of things have you invested in, and what are the trends?
So one I'm extremely excited about spending more and more time on is, again, this vertical of human AI integration, right? How do we bring AI into our day-to-day lives? And the two areas that I think are most ready for or interesting for the next 5 years is, one, smart glasses, and two, brain-computer interfaces. So I was about to show it, but it's my case is empty. Right there. So in March, we backed a company called Mentra, and so they built an operating system for smart glasses. And so when you hear smart glasses, I'm not talking about the big VR headsets. I'm talking about glasses that are this small. All the computing is right here in the back. These things weigh less than 40 grams on your nose, which is essentially the scientific number that you need to hit. You need to be less than 30 grams on the nose, less than 40 grams on the whole head, so that people don't notice it, that they don't feel it, that they don't get tired. You need to have battery life of about 24 hours a day. Why is this relevant? To make AI useful, AI should be able to see what you see. It should be able to hear what you hear. It should be able to enhance and annotate the world around you and show you things. And it should be able to talk to you. And so what is the best form factor to be able to and give AI all these senses? right? And sure, people might say the jury's still out on it, and they will go out and try things out. They will try like AirPods with the camera, but then if you have long hair, the hair covers it, doesn't work. People try pendants, but the pendant, anybody who's ever worn a necklace knows like they flip around, right? So like unless it's a 360 camera, that's tricky, right? So essentially, if you run this experiment fast enough, you realize, okay, glasses actually make a lot of sense, right? Why? Because it's literally eye field of view. So if you move your head, the camera moves with you without you doing anything, and your hands free. And so again, we're not into the hardware, but instead we're into the software. So we backed the operating system. And so there's a lot of interesting things that are already possible now. So for example, I was in Japan 2 weeks ago. There's an app that does live translation. So I'm wearing the glasses, I'm hearing Japanese, it auto translates to me on the screen, right? Again, the software is the less exciting part, because you can do that with ChatGPT today, but it does it all the time and in the person and anywhere I'm going around. And then you can go to more exciting. Like for example, there's an app that listens to your conversations, and then based on what you're talking about, it tries to enhance your knowledge and intelligence more or less in areas of things you might be able to benefit. So for example, maybe you name drop somebody and it assumes I don't know that. So it gives me a really quick definition of who's that person. Or, we talk about, the economy of India, and it gives me some stats really quickly about, whether that is the GDP or, how many billions in investments happen in the AI space and so forth, right? So the idea is AI is capable of so much. How do we integrate that day to day and really unleash ourselves to raise our IQ? So that's an example where, of course, this is earlier stage, meaning they have several hundred developers. They're not focusing on making revenue yet, because the real goal here is like, how do you capture mindshare, right? How do you capture as many developers as possible to build on your operating system? Because if you have 1,000, 5,000 killer apps on this device, then you win, right? So that's another example of like, how we bring AI into the day to day.
I read something interesting as you're talking about this glass and the sort of an augmentation, of your experience. The guy I forget his name, the guy who's the CEO of Scale AI, which Meta has just invested a huge amount. Alex, he's invested a lot. Meta has invested a lot of money in that company. And he's 27 years old. And he's made the statement that he wants to delay
having kids,
because he wants to wait for augmentation to become possible. He doesn't want to disadvantage his kids by having them now while we are preparing for augmentation. How do you feel about that, since you're working on brain-computer
interface? Yeah. Listen, I'll first caveat by saying I think a lot of people jump to conclusions against him out of romanticism of the past. I'm personally also like in the embryo freezing process right now. So like, we're freezing because I'm 30. I'm not quite ready to have children yet, because I think there's a lot more work that I want to do before I bring children in this world. And so, I don't know whether I'll wait as long as he will until that technology is ready. But I do think technology is only getting better. When it comes to the choice of whether or not to have invasive BCIs, I think the world will ultimately bifurcate between those that have it and those that don't. And I think those that don't will be massively disadvantaged, right? Because think about like, let's just say we've already seen that there's been tests that foundational models are able to pass every single test, like LSAT, medical exams, and so forth, like without a problem at this stage already. And AI is only getting better. I think it's the same thing as like, do you choose to upgrade to 170 IQ, or do you choose to continue to be, your simple self, right? And it will get to the point that even somebody that might have been more median IQ with the technological implementation will outshine somebody that was 10 points higher than them, right? Mm-hmm. And then, of course, again, you can get very romantic, like, what's this all lead to? You know, this is just it is an infinite chase, and some of that can be true, but also it is my belief that if we as a species in general were to raise our collective IQ, we would likely have less wars. We would likely have less resource depletion. We would likely solve a lot of the bigger issues, right? Does it make us less of ourselves? I don't think so. I don't think reading a book makes you less of yourself either, right? Now, I think, if anything, having a much tighter integration of AI in our personality, what makes it ourselves, will, if anything, be better, because I see the worst happening without it. So the worst that's happening, if you just look at the trends today, what people are doing, if you're getting any kind of service emails today, they probably all look AI generated. Why? Because there's actual humans. Nobody's holding their hands behind the back, right? Nobody's holding guns to their head, and nobody's implanted a chip in the head, but they already sound like AI. Why? Because much of the Western population has now defaulted to being very lazy, where they write out an idea, they copy and paste it, say, ChatGPT, make this sound better, plug it back in. We've all become bots in a way, where I think if you play this scenario out over another 3 years, most people will be incapable of forming
proper writing. Yes.
Most people will be incapable of forming, like having proper critical thought. Why? Because in the past, you need to think a problem through. Now you're just asking ChatGPT, what do you think about this? What's the solution? Right? So ironically, even those that choose not to, I think their own capabilities will be continuously declining unless they keep challenging themselves. So
here I'm gonna, since I asked you this question, I'm gonna, for the audience, I'm gonna give you a pointer. Actually, quite a number of years ago, before the pandemic, I wrote a series. It's all available on my blog for you to read, called Man and Superman: Human History Bifurcates, which addresses exactly this. People who do not choose to augment are going to be at a disadvantage. That was my thesis as well. And now we are seeing more real manifestations of that. The part that excites me also very much is, disease, right? It's not just augmentation, it's also gene editing. And any kind of gene editing enabled removal of possibilities of diseases that are handed down to you by your genes. That's a massive, massive opportunity, and unambiguously benevolent stream of thought. But
and I think that's where a lot of the real startups will start migrating. As we raise our capabilities, right? As we become smarter, we can do more with less. Look, I think there was going to be a diminishing game here where people try to bet on apps, because we can now make apps with a single person and we can build them in 3 weeks instead of 2 years. Fantastic. But that's a zero-sum game where essentially those kind of app layers will collapse, because again, the ease of making them becomes too low, and to become free, essentially, there's no need to charge them, because you might even just ask your agent. A lot of these things are things now that you can just ask your agent, hey, I'm going to Japan, make me a travel itinerary. This used to be an app, right? Like a travel app. So where does the brains go? If the brains collectively get smarter and are more capable, well, they start tackling bigger problems, And so to your point, I think longevity and biotech and all that is going to be a big focus, and you already see the movements, right? Whether it's a Brian Johnson, don't die, whether you love him or hate him. I think that is kind of the canary in the coal mine that, as foreign as it used to sound, like tackling death, I think will be one of the next big.
Tackling death is one thing, but just there's so many people living with such debilitating diseases, and if you can just eliminate that, there are whole classes of problems that can be taken out, which would enormously enhance quality of life, right?
100%. Well, I say tackling death as like the final goalpost, and in order to get there, you need to solve all these thousands of individual diseases, right? So I just think like if you were to draw a graph, right, over the next 100 years, it will look like we're trying to tackle death, but in reality, we will need to solve for all kinds of individual cancers, right? We need to solve for metabolic syndrome. We will need to solve for heart failures and so forth.
Yeah. So I think biotech and AI-enabled drug discovery, genetic engineering, all of these things are very, very promising areas. The one completely negative possibility, which also we need to be aware of, is brainwashing. You know, the minute you open your brain up to this level of manipulation, you are opening yourself up to this level of brainwashing as well. And that's the part that worries me about this technology. But, you know, every technology 100%. Has positive potential and bad potential.
100%. I think, so the good news and bad news, whatever angle you look at it from, is these things will probably take a lot longer than it currently feels like. Yes, we're going at hyper speed. Everything feels like amazing, right? But the reality is we're probably still 5+ years away from anything material in the invasive side, you know, because I see the timelines, even when it comes to things like smart glasses, right? Some of the leading startups, you know, they go into their first productions, they might be selling 10,000 units this year or next year. That puts us in 2026 already, right? Like then if they succeed, they're going to raise more money and they might do a bigger run with like 100,000 units, right? Like it's going to take until like 2030 for there to be millions and millions and millions of units. And then that's just smart glass. If we go towards something like BCIs, you know, some of these BCI startups, they're hoping to launch commercially in like 2028, right? It takes time to do these things, and even then,
and there's like, regulation involved. This is not something that can happen without regulation.
Correct. So, and then that can go in two directions. Either the regulation needs to come first, or the regulation lags, meaning these things launch first, and then usually regulators, they take years to figure things out. Prime example, the crypto space, where crypto was a big subject already in 2017. That was a big ICO mania. It wasn't until this week, essentially, that the Senate passed a stablecoin bill. It is 8 years after stablecoin mania that the first proper crypto bill was passed in the Senate. 8 years.
Yeah, but you know, crypto is a financial innovation.
Yep.
Finance is very, very complicated. It doesn't have the same level of regulatory framework that is easy to adopt, but FDA
I would argue
is
the
in
same
place.
thing for medical. No, I mean, when it's about our lives, I'm sure we see those like peptides and stem cells, you know, even today, you know, the FDA goes back and forth on banning peptides because there's lack of clarity about, you know, how safe are they? Do we need them? And I think there's a non-zero chance. I would say there's a very large chance that all this human enhancement will, again, the bifurcation will also be political, where you can guess which one, you know, like one party will be pro, one party will be against, and the party will be against will probably be the one that represents the demographic that can't afford it, right? Because like ultimately there will be price tags associated with it. So I don't think everybody will be able to afford the best longevity treatments, and whether it's, you know, human enhancements and brain chips and so forth, you know. And so then it becomes a debate of like, well, should that even exist? Because it's not fair, right? Like it only makes the rich poor gap even bigger and bigger and bigger. So it will be politicized on that level too. But I think ultimately you build and back the founders, the products that, you know, are creating a net benefit for society, and they're creating net efficiencies. And I think that always wins the long term. Like there will be hiccups along the road. But I think both efficiency and the good usually win over long enough time horizon.
On that note, Felix, thank you for participating. Great to have you here.